letter that Bill Wilson wrote. I think that many AA oldsters who have put our AA booze cure to severe but successful tests still find they often lack emotional sobriety. Perhaps they will be the spearhead for the next major development in AA, the development of a much more real maturity and balance, which is to say, humility in our relations with ourselves, with our fellows, and with God. Those adolescent urges that so many of us have for top approval, perfect security, and perfect romance, urges quite appropriate to age 17, proved to be an impossible way of life when we were at age 47 or 57. Since AA began, I've taken immense wallops in all these areas because of my failure to grow up emotionally and spiritually. My God, how painful it is to keep demanding the impossible, and how very painful to discover, finally, that all along we have had the cart before the horse. Then comes the final agony of seeing how awfully wrong we have been, but still finding ourselves unable to get off the emotional merry-go-round. How to translate a right mental conviction into a right emotional result, and so into easy, happy, and good living. Well, that's not only the neurotic's problem, it's the problem of life itself for all of us who have got to the point of real willingness to hew to right principles in all of our affairs. Even then, as we hew away, peace and joy may still elude us. That's the place so many of us AA oldsters have come to, and it's a hell of a spot, literally. How shall our unconscious, from which so many of our fears, compulsions, and phony aspirations still stream, be brought into line with what we actually believe, know, and want? How to convince our dumb, raging, and hidden Mr. Hyde becomes our main task. I've recently come to believe that this can be achieved. I believe so because I begin to see many benighted ones, folks like you and me, commencing to get results. Last autumn, depression, having no rational cause at all, almost took me to the cleaners. I began to be scared that I was in for another long chronic spell. Considering the grief I've had with depressions, it wasn't a bright prospect. I kept asking myself, why can't the 12 steps work to release depression? By the hour, I stared at the St. Francis prayer. It's better to comfort than be comforted. Here was the formula, all right, but why didn't it work? Suddenly, I realized what the matter was. My basic flaw had always been dependence, almost absolute dependence on people, circumstances, to supply me with prestige, security, and the like. Failing to get these things according to my perfectionist dreams and specifications, I had fought for them. And when defeat came, so did my depression. There wasn't a chance of making the outgoing love of St. Francis a workable and joyous way of life until these fatal and almost absolute dependencies were cut away. Because I had over the years undergone a little spiritual development, the absolute quality of these frightful dependencies had never before been so starkly revealed. Reinforced by what grace I could secure in prayer, I found I had to exert every ounce of will and action to cut off these faulty emotional dependencies upon people, upon AA, indeed upon any set of circumstances whatsoever. Then only could I be free to love as Francis had. Emotional and instinctual satisfactions I saw were really the extra dividends of having love, offering love, and expressing a love appropriate to each relation of life. Plainly, I could not avail myself of God's love until I was able to offer it back to him by loving others as he would have me. And I couldn't possibly do that so long as I was victimized by false dependencies. For my dependency meant demand, a demand for the possession and control of the people and the conditions surrounding me. While those words, absolute dependency, may look like a gimmick, they were the ones that helped to trigger my release into my present degree of stability and quietness of mind, qualities which I am now trying to consolidate by offering love to others regardless of the return to me. This seems to be the primary healing circuit, an outgoing love of God's creation and his people, by means of which we avail ourselves of his love for us. It is most clear that the real current can't flow until our paralyzing dependencies are broken, and broken at depth. Only then can we possibly have a glimmer of what adult love really is. Spiritual calculus, you say? Not a bit of it. Watch any AA of 6 months working with a new 12-step case. If the case says to the devil with you, the 12-stepper only smiles and turns to another case. He doesn't feel frustrated or rejected. If his next case responds and in turn starts to give love and attention to other alcoholics, yet gives none back to him, the sponsor is happy about it anyway. He still doesn't feel rejected. Instead, he rejoices that his one-time prospect is sober and happy. And if his next following case turns out later to be his best friend or romance, then the sponsor is most joyful. But he well knows that his happiness is a byproduct, the extra dividend of giving without any demand for return. The real stabilizing thing for him was having and offering love to that strange drunk on his doorstep. This was Francis at work, powerful and practical, minus dependency and minus demand. In the first 6 months of my own sobriety, I worked hard with many alcoholics. Not a one responded, yet this work kept me sober. It wasn't a question of those alcoholics giving me anything. My stability came out of trying to give, not out of demanding that I receive. Thus, I think it can work out with emotional sobriety. If we examine every disturbance we have, great or small, we will find at the root of it some unhealthy dependency and its consequent unhealthy demand. Let us, with God's help, continually surrender these hobbling demands. Then we can be set free to live and love. We may then be able to 12-step ourselves into emotional sobriety. Of course, I haven't offered you any real new idea, only a gimmick that has started to unhook several of my own hexes at depth. Nowadays, my brain no longer races compulsively in either elation, grandiosity, or depression. I have been given a quiet place in a bright sunshine.
All right. Thank you so much, Corey. I really appreciate that, man. You did a great job reading that tonight. Good. We had a little rotation going on. Not that I have any control issues with that. So tonight I have the privilege of introducing both Jim and Kenny. I think, Mary Thayer talked about several months ago when she hosted and did a great job, or moderated and did a great job, how there's certain people, like great friends of hers and stuff like that, that she just felt this energy and this safety with. And I think Kenny's definitely one of those people. From the first time I met Kenny, he's one of those guys that I just feel safe, and his presence just really brings a lot of warmth and serenity to me. And I think that Jim has become one of my closest friends over the years, and I've watched him personally shed a lot of dependencies just over the last 4 months, and just go through a whole big cool awakening, and seen big transformations in both their lives over the last year. Gigantic things that, easy to be tethered to emotionally, and just watch these guys walk through it. And it's just such a privilege, and such great examples of what AA can do for us. So with that, I'm going to open it up. And this is our first time we've ever had two guys together. These guys have both done it together when we did our men's meeting, and they did a phenomenal job. So I thought it'd be cool to have them both to kind of talk about that. So I'm going to not take up any more of their time. Jim, Kenny, you ready to rock and roll?
We're ready.
Take it away. All right, take it away, man.
Yeah, I don't know how much rock and roll we're going to do, but we're ready. And what a privilege it is to be asked to come do this, Sam. And for the two of us, we're going to share some things with you tonight that we've been working on together in our prayer and meditation, and there's some spiritual material that we've read. And I just want to make a couple caveats too, is that although it might appear we're in a country garden somewhere, we are actually in the middle of the city here where I'm at. And we're outside, and so we're taking a little chance here. We're not only are we not adequately social distanced with 6 foot, so we're putting our life on the lines for you guys, but we've got the train could go by. We've got boats over here that could go by blowing their whistles. We've got a neighbor over here that's getting his house roofed, and planes fly by, so we could have a little noise to deal with, but hopefully not. We'll see. But we decided this is where we wanted to be. We wanted to be outside and sitting together in one space rather than doing two, from two locations. So one of the things that I thought about that I wanted to just bring up on the emotional sobriety was Jim and I talked a little bit, and one of the things, you guys have had such a long list of so many fantastic people that if I just, you guys have done such a good job of bringing so many of our AA heroes to the table here to talk about this, that, there was a part that thought, geez, what else could we add to this discussion? And I think Jim's done it and I've done it. Now we're doing this together. So we're doing a little different, but just on that, I just want to say, that before Sam asked me to come back and do this again, I was in meditation, and I sometimes I'll come out of meditation and do some writing if I got some heavy thoughts that have come up. And I wrote a little piece on emotional sobriety that came to me. And what really came to me was how difficult of a time it was in my life. And I'm just saying this in case there's anybody out there, but that's going through this, you know, how difficult of a time it was, particularly in early sobriety. When I mean early sobriety, like the most difficult time for me was when I was 6 and 7 years sober, and I went through a divorce and lost, you know, I'd come from being homeless and, you know, a homeless, drug addicted alcoholic, you know, to a guy that actually was buying his first home and stuff. And then I went through this divorce. But, you know, the fact that we physically get physical sobriety way before we get emotional sobriety, and I got enough intelligence, you know, like mental sobriety back, that I got some, you know, I had some a little bit of business success and going, and I got to a place, you know, financially, I was a lot more sober than I used to be. I could think about money in ways that was pretty healthy. And, but, you know, I hadn't got that emotional sobriety yet. And just like Bill wrote about in that letter, you know, that just touched me because, man, you know, that just brought me to my knees. The fact that on the outside, the appearance was that I had everything going for myself. And I was doing workshops and talks and all kinds of things. On the outside, you know, this outside was not this inward reality at all. You know, inwardly, I was like a small child stunted in my growth, and I wasn't emotionally sober. And it, you know, I think it could, you know, Bill writes there, it could nearly drove me back to drink. And that was my deal at that time, is that I just couldn't take it that, that, you know, somebody might have observed some anger outburst that I had, or I would throw something across a room, you know, years sober, or, you know, I would drive people I was working with nuts. You know, we alcoholics are hard on other people, and we're particularly hard on other people even when we're sober. Years sober, we can be very difficult people to be around because of this. So so one of the things that I wanted to talk about was, you know, kind of the things that I'm doing recently, which is that, you know, I got into this method where I do meditation. And when I do meditation, I do reading. I read something, and then I meditate on what it was that I just read, and then I write something, just a paragraph or two. And this has been extremely helpful for me. And so lately, you know, I've been doing, kind of circling back to this Emmett Fox stuff that I've done for most of my sobriety. And I should say I've been sober since June of 1989. So it's been a long time, and I was turned on to this stuff pretty early sobriety. And I've turned a lot of other people onto it too. But just recently, like Jim and I have just witnessed this explosion, you know, like it's just when the time is right and that spark is there, and, you know, people are waking up, and people have just taken to this format that Jim and I have developed, that, and we've been sharing it with all the guys that we've been sober. And there's a big part of it, you know, like, and so here comes the train. So I'm gonna turn it over to so what can I say about this? You know, I just been taking these little, it doesn't matter, you know, we've been doing Emmett Fox, doesn't matter, just these little spiritual assignments. And when I read, there's some stuff I read and do that. I do it at the same place and the same time every day. And when I read out loud to myself, which gets my attention. I don't end up turning pages and thinking, what the hell did I just read? And same time, same place, I read it out loud, and then I meditate on what it was that I just read. And then so it's a contemplative meditation. And, you know, so how do you know you're emotionally sober? You know, I mean, that's a little hard. Bill mentions humility in there. Is it humble to say that I feel like, oh yeah, I'm a Jim and I are sitting here today, a couple of emotionally sober guys. So, but I know I'm emotionally sober when I'm calm, and at the end of the day, when I'm looking at the 11th step and I can answer that I was kind and loving towards everybody. And that happens in my life today. There's days I go to bed and I think, I associated with a lot of people today, and I was kind and loving towards everybody. And there's times when that's not the case. But these kind of things, I think that's important. Like, what are the, some of these, and when I'm not, it's some unhealthy reliance that I have on other people. And, a huge one for me recently has been, what do other people think of me? And I can remember one time, Don Pritz telling me he was 31 years sober, and he gave a talk out here in Everett, close to Seattle, and he was 31 years sober, or 32, which is about the same sobriety I have now. And I remember him saying from the podium, I really don't care what anybody thinks of me. I finally got to a place where I thought, and I was sitting there years, back and thinking, oh my God, that's taken him that long. And I'm still not there yet, but I know I can. I know I'm going to get there because I've seen other people do it that got calm enough to, calm down enough to know that they don't really care what other people have. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim, and he can share some stuff with you, and we'll talk a little bit about the Emmett Fox work that we've been doing too.
All right. Well, thanks, Kenny. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Sam. And there's a few people in the room. I've got, Kenny, who's my sponsor. I've got Sam, who actually once upon a time worked for me. So they know what my unhealthy demands, dance, monkey, dance, looks like. And I got Lisa, my partner, on here. And so I've got to be honest, and that's beautiful. And I think it would be great. We all qualify to get here. I'm 18 years sober, and this is my birthday month. Oops. And at 17 years sober, as Sam mentioned, about 5-6 months ago, I hit a wall, and it was beautiful. It was when this meeting was first originated, or close to, and Sam asked me to lead, and I really got to look in the mirror of where I was emotionally sober, and these dependencies and attachments that I had for my well-being, and how I'd kind of plateaued, reading the book to, 3 to 5 guys a week. And like Kenny spoke of, and I always like to quote recently, because it makes sense to me, for a person to break myself, spiritual pride, break through the spiritual pride is like getting an alcoholic sober that has a bunch of money that won the lotto. It is not an easy task, man. And, I can hold enlightenments temporarily. I can read, what I know so well within Fox or awakenings in the past to other people, but they don't hold. And there's nothing that I could bring from the outside inside. And, that is where this work, and where we've gone through Fox with this power through constructive thinking, these spiritual treatments that Kenny and I have been working on now, and taking people through, just like we do with the steps, to have this recent transformation is beautiful. And it's been a quest that, I've been able to hold this transfer. I was able to transform through this, but B, I've been able to stay awake through bringing people through this process. And so I know this isn't your Alcoholics Anonymous, and this is a spiritual workshop. So I hope you'll all thrive on some of what we're going to share with you today in the first 4 or 5 chapters of this book that we've been studying like a text. And so however you want to go through it, were you thinking start with? All right. So, the first chapter, and I spoke on this a little bit before, in the Power Through Constructive Thinking is called The Wonder Child. And you know what's great about Fox is, you know, he does these chapters, and there's all these little pamphlets and brochures on Amazon. And you know, Kenny had been in a meditation. This was prior to kind of my breakdown, where I'd really hit the ceiling, and all my relationships were crumbling. You know, my business, you know, the pandemic, my fears, my relationship with Lisa on here, and you know, this is where, you know, I was hitting the wall, and Kenny knew this as well. And I was plagued with fears because I was in control of my life again. And from the outside, you'd look at me and go, oh my God, look at this guy's life. Talk about a guy that has it all, right? Well,
Yeah.
the guy that looked like he had it all was cracking, you know, compression fractures. And, you know, thank God, you know, when you're in tune, kind of like Kenny, you guys have heard his story when he spoke of his first sponsor, Al, at the car lot. And it was the first trip that Al was leaving Kenny behind. And Kenny was really worried. Al's mom was over in Boise or Spokane or somewhere. And Al had to go leave Kenny. And Kenny was on his own on Aurora, you know, which is a shooting gallery. We both know every motel like the back of our hands. And there's Kenny paralyzed, worried. Well, guess what? Al shows up that morning with his breakfast sandwich for Kenny and orange juice and says, hey man, you know, I could really use some help moving my mom's stuff and I need you to help me. That intuitive thought of a loved one, and what we possess in Alcoholics Anonymous was the same thing that happened for Kenny on the morning when I was at this place and Kenny had meditated. The Wonder Child, you know, hit his heart, and he said, you know, he grabbed his brochure or his little pamphlet that he had downstairs here, and he called me and said, hey, let's get together and go for a walk. And on this walk, he handed me the Wonder Child and this medicine for this whole new adventure and embarkment that I've been on. And so the Wonder Child is broken into 4 parts. Can you still hear us okay? All right. So the Wonder Child is broken into 4 parts. One is the Wonder Child. We study it in 4 pieces, as I mentioned. You know, what we'll do is we'll read out loud like Kenny says. Actually, we'll read the whole thing through. It's a 5-day treatment, or 6, excuse me. And then we'll meditate. And then we'll journal on what we read for the chapter, The Wonder Child. And then the next day, on day 2, we'll read about the Wonder Child itself. We'll stop where it gets to the counselor. We'll stop and meditate, journal again. The next part's on the counselor. You're following me so far, and we're happy to go through with anybody to walk them through this process. But I'll get to the depth of this. I hope, you know, and here's what I really, you know, and I pray is how this relates to 6 and 7 and the emotional sobriety is, this is where for a guy with 17 years sober, it goes from bridge to shore. You know, it gets where that perilous pestilence, that darkness, that stuff that's sticky and still with me sober, that I don't have a remedy for, that I can look at my defects of character, I can pray on them, I can do inventory, but how do I actually remedy these and treat these finally so that I don't have these attachments and projections? I was a walking projector. You know, I mean, the troubles that I had from growing up in an alcoholic home, the shame and the guilt, you know, all the stuff that we have, that taint, as some alcoholics say. Well, you know, if I'm not on the inside spiritually fit, I'm just projecting this stuff everywhere. My daughter said it best to me recently, and she's a normie. She said, you know, people are just projections of what I see them as. And it's so true. And I had needed everybody else to give me the projections of what I thought I should be. And if they didn't give it to me because I didn't have it inside of me, well, then they'd fail me. And I wasn't okay, and it could only hold momentarily. And so that's what was really the driver here. And so going through it, you know, the wonder child is really about the miracle child, our consciousness, you know, and all of us have it, you know, this intuitive thought, the presence of God. Here comes a train, so I'll be a little louder. And so with we all know this consciousness, you know, we know it when we really did our, there it comes. Woo! Yee! There it comes. That's a little loud. All right. So, you know, when we do our first step in that full surrender, we awaken to this consciousness, you know, this higher power. You know, it's been this intuitive thought that I think all of us know, this fundamental Christ, God within us place. And so that's the miracle child. As we look back in our lives, even with all the trouble that I've had, it's always been there. It's always taken care of me. It's this place that I can always go to. And in the second part, which is the counselor is really the voice of God, the presence of God that, you know, our conscious place, our soul can then communicate with. This is all internal. This isn't external. You know, I can, like I spoke of enlightenment, the counselor communicating with our conscious, you know, as part of that I am, as you've heard of. We go into the next part of the four, which is the Prince of Peace. And the Prince of Peace, or excuse me, the Everlasting Father, fourth is Prince of Peace. The Everlasting Father is really speaking of the manifestation of the Father and the child. You know, if he's the Father, then I'm really a manifestation of him. And not to speak on Christianity, but are we really that different of what Jesus was? You know, if he's really an example of the Father, well, you know, if we're born of this place, which is, you look at 4-year-old kids, 3-year-old kids, their joy, their elation, they're doing cartwheels in a restaurant, like Kenny spoke of. They're not concerned a bit of what anybody speaks of them, because they're all internal expression of what we're born with. Well, this mind is not in sequence with the internal presence. And so then it goes to the Prince of Peace, which is this harmonious life that we have the ability to live in. Who's to say that it's really not heaven that we're living in right now, based on the awakening or living within this indwelling place? And so that's the wonder child. And I think I spoke for a while. You can add into pieces, and I'll interrupt you as much as you do me. And so I'll pass it back on to you, Ken.
Well, thanks. That was good that the train came while Jim was talking, and I apologize for that. We were hoping that the Burlington Northern guys and the commuter rails that go by here wouldn't be too bad. So I hope that wasn't too bad. But you know, I like to think about you know, how does this relate to Alcoholics Anonymous? You know, how does this relate to the work that we're doing? There's a couple things that I think about. One is, you know, this idea that they say there's other good, you know, there's other good books also. The other thing that they, you know, I think about is this piece that says, well, gosh, you know, how can I, and that's really what this Wonder Child is about. You know, it's this going from this place where the book says, you know, I don't have what you guys have. You know, how am I ever to get what this person has? And we've all been there where we've saw these people that had some kind of a spiritual connection. And you just thought, God, if only I could believe like he believes, like our book says. And it says, but no, you've just forgot that you've accessed this power much greater than yourself. And that's really what this Wonder Child is about. It's about, you know, accessing, what is that? What is that power? And they went through the things that Jim talked about, well, it's this counselor, and one of the things he says in there is that this counselor is never wrong, because if we're tapped in and we're doing this in meditation and we take things, I like to think about every decision is a spiritual decision. And so if every decision is a spiritual decision, then when I take these things into prayer and meditation and I look at this counselor, this power greater than myself that can act as the counselor, or the father, or the Prince of Peace, or some of these other things that Fox talks about. The big book talks about intuition and inspiration, the intuitive thought that I can come away with a decision. And the only time, I've just got so much evidence of this in my life that the only time that I fall upon this deal of making these kind of mistakes or opening my mouth and firing away is when I'm not tapped into that source. One of the things I want to commend you guys too, for all of you that help put this meeting together. I do a meeting once a month. It's with the guys I sponsor and a few of the guys they sponsor, but we try to keep it kind of, small because, we do a lot of accountability in that group, which means that we tell people stuff that's going on in our lives we wouldn't want them to know about, that we wouldn't want other people to know about it. So we do this on a regular basis. And one of the things we do is people bring some piece of spiritual material to that meeting, and somebody different leads the meeting every month. And I commend people for doing that because there is this great volume of spiritual material, and a lot of it has deep roots in Alcoholics Anonymous, like this work that we're doing with Emmett Fox. That Fox was a minister in New York City in the 1930s, and he was not a real well-known guy until he wrote the book Sermon on the Mount. And he wrote that book, and that book was published in late 34, which is the month that Bill Wilson got sober in New York. And it became a national bestseller over the course of 1935, 36, 37, and got, translated into a bunch of languages, kind of that story of what happened with our book. And this was going on at the same time. These guys were, a lot of the Oxford groupers, these early people that were in New York especially, would go and see Fox. And Fox didn't believe in ownership of anything. He never had a church. He never wanted there to be a church of Emmett Fox. So he would, get the ballroom at the Astor Hotel, and then he did the old Hippodrome, and eventually he was doing every single Sunday. He would do Madison Square Gardens, and he had the biggest church in the United States with thousands of people coming every Sunday to hear his message. And a lot of those people that came, there was a large group of the people in AA at that time that were in New York that were going to hear Fox, and there was these other connections that he had. So the one I guess I'll talk about for a minute is like the 23rd Psalm, and it's one of the other that's in this book, this Power Through Constructive Thinking book by Emmett Fox, and it's part of the things that people were studying in AA in the early days. And I'm not a real religious guy, so I don't, this is not about religion. It's like when Roland said to Carl Jung, oh, this is good news, man, because I'm really well thought of in my church. And Jung said to him, hey, this doesn't have anything to do with religion. That's not going to help you here. And so I just want to make that clear that that's not from the point that I'm coming from. But the 23rd Psalm, and we got another train coming, but the the 23rd Psalm. And Sam, maybe you can raise your finger if you can hear me or not hear me. So, yeah, you can hear me good. Okay.
Yeah.
So the thing about that, you know, he breaks that down into every verse. But there's a place in our book where it says that we might think about, and it's in the morning meditation, we might think about memorizing a few set prayers. And so why would you do that? You know, we memorize the set aside prayer, the serenity prayer, and the Lord's Prayer in AA. And so, but one of the ones I've done is the 23rd Psalm, you know, that's idea that the Lord is my shepherd, that he make me to lie down in green pastures, that he leads me by still waters. That means the calmness, that you know, he leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And you know, that yea though yea though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. That whole piece. And you know, it's just so beautiful, because that when we're in that valley, you know, and the spiritual life is like that. It's like the sine curve. Sometimes we're way up here in the mountaintop and we're singing about emotional sobriety and how great it is and how emotional sober I am. And then we're way up here in the mountaintop. And other times we're down here in the valley. And I'm telling you, when you're down there in the valley, you don't remember what it's like to be up at the mountaintop. You can't even remember, like, what the hell was that like when I knew the presence of God? It's gone, you know, and it's for those times, you know, I better have a few set prayers that I know, because that's the only thing that's going to come to me. I got to have something that I've committed to memory. That's not something that's out here, but it's a part of Kenny. You know, that's a part of who I am. That deal. It says, you know, that. Thou will prepare us the table for me in the presence of thine enemies. Well, who are my enemies? My own wrong thinking, Emmett Fox says. You know, it's my own wrong thinking that this power, this wonder child, is going to prepare a table before me in the presence of thine enemies, that's going to anoint my head, that my cup is going to run over. And it says that goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. You know, that's heavy symbolism stuff. And you know, it has deep meaning to me, because I've done this exercise with that, of sitting down for a week with that 23rd Psalm, and not just saying the Psalm, but reading it, and then reading everything that Fox wrote about it, and doing that every day for a week, and then writing a little something, and then committing that 23rd Psalm to memory. So, you know, that's just another piece I'd offer up. I'll turn it back to Jim, and then Jim can talk for another few minutes, and then we'll open it up, I think, and you know, we can do Q&A, or we can open it up, whatever your format is, to listen to some other people, because it's, you know, it's big stuff to look at this stuff and think about this, what's the symbolism in this, and what's it mean to me. You know, don't let any spiritual terms that might deter you asking yourself, what does this stuff mean to me? And you know, I've been prejudiced against a lot of things for way longer than was healthy for me, and to let go of all that stuff and be open to spiritual material, and for you guys to be able, you know, to open up a venue for us to talk about this, man, what a killer deal. Thank you so much.
Nice, Kenny. Well, I don't know about the couple minutes, because I'm thriving on this stuff, so I'll try to keep it reasonable. And I'm glad Kenny brought up the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, the good shepherd. You know, I think that's our third chapter in that book. I go back to the Lord's Prayer just for a minute, and share with you something that, you know, I mean, I think it's important to relate, you know, what happened in my transformation and kind of the path, you know, that gave me the ability, because I think we've all been there. Like Kenny said, when you're in the valley and you desire to get to the other side, you know, pain is such a good motivator obviously, but there's some sequential steps in this that really I can look back as being so clear of how these it all fell into place. So one is in the Lord's Prayer, when it speaks about forgive us, our trespasses as we forgive others. There's a piece in that that's a big treatment on forgiveness. And as I got into that, I really looked at some of the deeper stuff. For me, there was a lot of shame, guilt and shame I'd always struggled with in my sobriety. And, looking back, I had a lot of blame. I had an alcoholic father, and, he was a bit critical and so on. But I'd always, had that scar and carried that with me. And so fortunately, I was able to really do this treatment that's written in there and do a full, with finality, freeing forgiveness towards my father. And when I was able to do that, I could see that in a different light, that this was really just a delusion that I had in my mind that I carried with me as this, sadly kind of almost a badge or an excuse for how I'd been victimized. And once I was able, it was like projections like I talked about earlier, but once I'd gone through that, I promise you this, it's such a clear treatment of how to make that happen. And that really opened the door to the Good Shepherd. And I did make a couple notes. I really don't like to read off of a sheet, but I really have some good stuff that connects here. And with the Good Shepherd, it starts with, the Lord is my shepherd, thou shalt not want for any good thing. Now, in knowing that that is the truth, 1,000%, and that's really like that first step, you guys, for me, when I fully surrendered way back when, and I gave everything to my higher power in Alcoholics Anonymous, and knowing that I was cared for, and looking back at how my life, worked itself out, like all of us. I mean, I burned every bridge, the easy ones, twice. There was no way I could climb out of that pit that I had. And here was, again, at 17 years sober, kind of that recommittance. And here I just knew that truth because I'd already known and I'd forgotten. And so with that, I really could hear in that space, that consciousness of, what that verse truly meant. It meant all or nothing once again. And in meditation, I remember in this, last reset for me, I had everything on a life raft here in the Puget Sound, my relationships, my business, every dollar I had, and I let it go. And because it wasn't mine anymore. And what a sense of freedom. And I had plenty in the mind to be afraid of and worried and responsibility on my shoulders. But, knowing that I was taken care of in that surrender was, again, it wasn't the outside stuff anymore. And how the miracle child, the wonder child, had proven to me every time, even despite myself, over my 17 years sober, that he took care of me every single time, even when I, manipulated the situation and had some cleanup, every time without fail. So I know this truth to be the truth. And so as I, I'm on this inside deal, and I'm in the Good Shepherd, and it talks about in there, it goes, as Kenny mentioned, it anointest my head, or whatever that line in there. And that in that verse, it's about thankfulness and gratitude. And, once we've all know what that surrender is like, we know what full gratitude and a thankful heart and this unconditional love, which I, and I used to hear people in all the dozen treatment centers when I was trying to get sober, look in the mirror and tell yourself you love yourself. Well, I'd look in the mirror and it would never connect, and I couldn't do it because it was from the outside in. But when I'm in a heart of thankfulness and gratitude for this power within me, which is God is love, well, then I know what this unconditional love is like. I know what truly love is like, that I have and possess for everybody else. And so it follows that with this cup runneth over. And where this ties in, you guys, on this forgiveness treatment is, you know, inside this space, we have the ability, God has the ability to take care of all of these complexities, that shame and guilt that I had as a little kid, and that delusion that I could try to write out in a fourth or fifth step, and I could do 6 and 7, and I could, on the exterior in my mind, pray for it to be removed. I actually have been ignited with this power and this presence of God to speak on that and see that trouble and see that delusion internally, where God can really fix my higher power, these complexities. I've been given all the resource of power that I used to think was outside of me, that is internal, that is, this presence of God that has really taken care of it, and it's all love, and it's self-love. And again, I think for me, for a long time, I really thought that, looking back, everything was conditional, because I thought that love, because it was given to me as a child with some pain that was attached to it, that I needed because that was my understanding of what love was, is that I needed to find it outside of myself, that I'd find it in drugs or women or, the right relationship, and that it was an outside experience, and then they could give it back to me so I would be whole. Well, I was backwards. And once I cleaned up those remedies through the forgiveness treatment and found this enormous, limitless load of love and presence of God, then I can, connect through that, and the cup runneth over. And then I think it would be great to get into, if you had time, the Psalm 91 for a minute on the secret place, just to wrap it up. Or you could do the
Heart's Desire.
Heart's Desire.
Yeah.
Maybe the Heart's Desire would be good in this. But I'll pass this on to Kenny. In the Psalm 91, the secret place, this perilous pestilence that it talks about. That's my favorite psalm, you guys. Yeah. When I was in prison, my last treatment center for 14 months, and I got one of those Gideon Bibles, I would read that psalm, and here it shows up with Fox all these years later in this book, that it talks about that perilous pestilence that walks in the darkness, the lion and the adder, and it talks about, well, the lion you can see coming at you, but the adder that walks in the darkness, you can never see it. Well, those are all my subconscious thoughts. And I had thought in sobriety for a long time, let go, let God, I'll just put that away. Well, where'd it go? It's still there in my subconscious thoughts. Well, as I've ignited this kind of I am presence or presence of God internally, I can take things head on internally, and through an intellectual, spiritual heart and mind, I can pretty much take care of anything head on now. So I don't have all of these subconscious, and I think some of you may relate to this. These subconscious things that are always there or in the darkness. It's this is a neat exercise. So I hope we're speaking to people, and you're connecting it with Alcoholics Anonymous, because it's really been powerful for me. So go ahead, King.
Well, good. One thing I want to say is that, I've had a chance to watch Jim wake up a few times, and when we started working together, Jim was sober a few years. And I just want to say, that was great, because we went through the work and the big book, and I got to see a guy wake up, who's been sober for a while, which is not unusual to this crowd to see that. And but then lately, you know, just doing this Emmett Fox work, and it was just so rewarding to me because it's something that's been a part of my sobriety for a long time. But I hadn't really got a lot of traction with guys I've been working with. You know, for one, just so you're clear, you know, I don't take people through this Emmett Fox work until they've been through the big book, and then sometimes we'll go through the 12 and 12. And then, but somebody will come back after a period of time and say, man, I got these problems in my life, and I'm sponsoring 12 guys, and got service positions, and I'm busy, and I'm doing everything, but I still, you know, I'm locked up with this emotional sobriety stuff. And I'll bring them back and say, well, why don't you check this out? And for Jim, it was that forgiveness prayer that Fox has in the back of Sermon on the Mount. And Clint, the late great Clint Hodges was the first guy that ever gave me that forgiveness prayer. And you know, I'd read the book, but I just never really saw the instructions in there until he did that at a workshop that he did one time. And then the other thing that I'm thinking about is, you know, so Jim's really, I mean, we've had this, and not just the two of us, we could have 10 of us here talking to you in our little area that have just had these profound experiences going back through this work that we're talking about. These reading and meditation and writing. And then, you know, at the end of the week, then we, you know, I call and we talk about what is it that you wrote? What is it that came to you in meditation about this piece that you wrote? We only talk about that. And the last piece I'll talk about, I think, is, and Sam, you know, give us the thumbs or something if we need to get this thing opened up. But on the heart's desire, is another one that's in this Power Through Constructive Thinking book. It's another one of his, and these are just little short chapters that he used to do sermons on. So he would write a piece and then he would give a sermon on it on Sunday. And then some of them would become very popular. People would ask him to do them again. And then eventually they found their way into these books called the Sparks books. And then from there, they came into this more modern publication of the Power Through Constructive Thinking. But, you know, that's been something that I've actually lived recently. You know, like if I was to share some recent experience with you, it would be the heart's desire. You know, through a series of stuff that happened in business that I didn't want to have happen. I didn't want it to be going on, but it happened anyways. You know, I was able to like get this break that I maybe would have never taken for myself. It was a God doing for me the things that I couldn't do for myself, and do these things that are really of my heart's desire. And in the heart's desire piece that he writes in the book, you know, he said that people will say like, oh God, I don't know what my heart's desire is. But he said, no, it's really easy. It's that very thing that's just sitting right there that you don't want to tell anybody about, because people are going to tell you, well, you can't ever do that, or that's impossible to do, or that's never going to work out, or nobody's going to like that if you do that, or people are going to judge you, or we're going to judge ourselves, or what's my wife going to think if I do this. And I've had the chance to like move past all those fears in my life just in last 2 years since this business event happened where I had a collapse in this business I was partnered in. And you know, I've got everything I need, man. It's been provided for me, and I have plenty of work, and I got more work than I want, but I'm able to also have time to pursue this heart's desire that I have, where I've been doing some writing, and it's just been like the most rewarding thing in my life. And you know, it's like he says in there that this is God's will for us. You know, this is connecting with God's will, that God does not put a desire in our hearts for a heart's desire and then not give us the ability to carry that out. You know, it's a way, like, God is not a trickster. You know, he's not, this isn't some kind of a joke that he puts some heart's desire in us and then doesn't give us the ability to carry it out. That we are people who, you know, we have to get out and follow this stuff or we get sick. You know, that's the deal. We get spiritually sick, we'll get emotionally sick, we'll get physically sick. if we're withholding this stuff within us. So, you know, that's one piece that I can't highly recommend more to do that with, to go through that heart's desire and come out the other end. And, you know, it wasn't God's desire for me to sit there stressed out at my desk working till 10 o'clock at night, thinking that I'm hitting some kind of big time here because they're writing stories about me in some business magazine. And that, you know, it was just insanity, you know, just total insanity that I've been freed on through this work. So that's like a real example of what this work has done for me recently. So I think I've already said this once, so this time I mean it, but that's enough for me for tonight. Thanks.
Nice, Kenny.
Hey, man, thank you guys so much. I'm going to start in on Jim real quick, and then I'm going to go to Kenny. So, you know, a few months ago, was it 6 or 7 months ago? First of all, I really enjoyed your conversation. I really enjoyed everything you guys said. But I remember you called me and you were in Hawaii, and at that time you had you still do have a gigantic car dealership up in Seattle, and you were engaged and you had all these things going, Jim, and you were like, you weren't sleeping because you were so anxious. And I remember you're like, man, you'd have these attacks where you couldn't go to sleep till like 4 a.m. And I would, after I got off the phone with you, be like, the hell is wrong with this guy? He's got like so much going on, and he's just like freaking out about this and that. I mean, this guy's got not shit to worry about, you know? And I think the kind of the lesson that was beautiful that you taught me one time when I said, man, Jim, you've got all this stuff. And at that time I was going through a really rough period. And I was like, man, you know, I might've missed my opportunity to do this big business thing, which I didn't, you know, it worked out, but I did all this stuff. And you said, hey man, the most important thing that you could ever do is the love that you give to other people. And it made me tear up in that moment, you know, and you said it right through you. And I don't think that you could hear yourself say it, but the neat thing was I watched you from May, June, and all of a sudden you go to Palm Springs, kind of have this break, go to Palm Springs, write this inventory, start doing this meditation with Kenny, and go through this like within a matter of days. This spark of freedom from these dependencies came, you know, just a matter of days. Like the whole business got shut down with COVID. You and the relationship was on the rocks, everything, and you just cut it all off. Went to Palm Springs, wrote this inventory, started meditating, and then you said, man, I'm free. And it's all about this unconditional love, this well of love that's coming in through me. And talk about for a second, if you can, talk about what you did on your journey back from Palm Springs, you know, maybe talking to your son or talking to your daughter, or talking to Lisa and talking to the guys in your life. What was it like coming back from Palm Springs with a different, you know, kind of awakened perspective on all that?
Wow. Well, thank you, Sam. And I will say, you know, the key, I had been fortunate enough to be 12-step in a group, one of Kenny and my best friends who'd been living in a tent shooting heroin under the freeway here for a few years. And he happened to be down in Palm Springs after treatment, about 50 days clean or more, 70. And I came down with him in mind to visit him and start working with him and that love, you know. And so that was, I can give him the credit and God for the intention and heart's desire to go care for him during my needs. And I was taught that by you guys, thank God. And that's where this blossomed. And through that inventory that I did, and I remember reading that inventory, and I had pages of, you know, second column stuff on people, and my girlfriend's on here, Lisa, and I'm, you know, had this transformation. Kenny, you know, as I read that inventory, and I had was aware of this conditional love, conditional to everything in my life, that here I read the inventory and Kenny quoted, was it Job or all my fears?
Job, yeah.
Say it.
my fears, that I have feared the most has come to pass.
And that was my inventory, man. All my fears came to pass. There again, this created all of them, right? So as I made these amends and really had my heart open towards love towards people and the impression and impact that I had had on them, that was the best amends and inventory that I've ever, and I've done a handful of them, that had the impact. And from there, I just had beautiful amends. Drove to Las Vegas to see my son, because I could actually feel the impact of how it was for him. And again, going back to that forgiveness treatment, that was huge, because that really opened my mind of, that delusion I was in and that pain and how that trouble was inside of me and how I had projected that onto other people. And man, that was powerful to have that visual and that impact of our self-centered fears and that taint that we go and touch somebody else with. And I wanted to free everybody with that, which in turn, all those fears that I had, like Kenny's story, when my heart desire was on our friend Steve, he might be on here too. And it was the love towards him was my intention. And I was not my business if it went down that raft or my house or, God's will. When I let go of those attachments that were holding me, my life now has just transversed to where I'm selling my business, my heart's desire. I'm letting go. All these things are just fluid happening. You could not during COVID paint a better picture of how once I'd let go, how everything is just showing for itself. I'm in the healthiest relationships with my family, my partner, my relationship with others, because it's the inside job. It's not up here in the mind. I can't bring anything from here in here. There's no serenity that I can read and practice to come into this place. So hopefully that answered it.
Yeah, man, you look about 20 times more peaceful.
Huh?
Yeah, I said you look about 20 times more peaceful than you did before you left. Yeah, that's great, man. Hey, and so Kenny, I remember, and if this isn't too bold for me to talk about, I remember you came in and you were having a lot of those huge shifts with the business stuff, that business you'd been involved with for a really long time and was really successful. You're a big part of, and some stuff was happening there. And I remember you coming to FOTS and sharing about how, you were worried, and somehow that worry had translated into, you having the realization that the love that you have with Shannon and Shannon's love with you and all that kind of stuff was what was real. And that you were so worried about your ability to be loved, or almost like this, that their love for you was based on your ability to provide from this thing. And there was all this fear going on. And I watched you kind of transition that gracefully, Can you talk a little bit about that, or would you be open to talk a little bit about just some of the big shifts you've had in the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, that was a huge deal for me, Sam. And I really appreciate you bringing that up. It's not always the most comfortable thing for me to talk about, but I really appreciate you bringing that up. I mean, I really mean that. And it's not comfortable, but it'd be not because it's uncomfortable in a unhealthy way, but just because it's such an emotional thing for me, this realization that I had. One of the things that was going on about that same time is, and I'll say this, about the, this love piece that, I have this great love for my wife. I have this great love for my children. I have love for people around me, for the girls that Shannon sponsors. I think of one right now. She's in a tough situation because her husband's a pretty unfair person and not a very healthy guy. And I'm just think about stuff and I just love them, but there's a real special love that we have here, in Alcoholics Anonymous, this love one alcoholic for another, and that's what Jim was talking about. It just really struck me. There's nothing like it, man. It's a super special love, and we've got this poverty of words in the English language, and so we don't have a separate word to describe that, but we should have something. Maybe somebody on the call coin a phrase for that. But you know, this love that we have one alcoholic for another, and I've got both things with my wife. You know, her and I both came from real similar backgrounds and stuff, and we've had some. You know, I have had some success in business. But I got that's that thing that you were thinking about, Sam. I got really sick, and I'll take just a minute to talk about this. But I got really sick. I had hepatitis C, and I had it for many, many years, and I still have cirrhosis, and you know, it did a lot of damage. Even though I finally cleared the virus here a few years ago, and I've had a couple trips to the hospital. I had a trip to the hospital. I was in ICU for a week, and real serious situation that happened. And because of my liver, and the thing that came to me was, and I have a spiritual advisor that lives up north. He's just a beautiful man, and I went to him and I said, "Hey Tim, I'm really worried because I'm sick, and what happens if something happens to me? I can see that Shannon has all this fear about who's going to provide and what's going to happen to the provider in the family and what's going to happen to our house and our assets. You know, I'm the breadwinner here, and I can see how afraid she is. And, you know, we're so lucky that we got people in our lives that have this intuitive thought, this inspiration, you know, guys like Tim. And Tim just looked right at me and he just said, Kenny, she loves you. And that was it. You know, that was, he was like, he woke me up like, she's not worried about the money, dude. She loves you. This is hard for her because she loves you. And it's, you know, in the presence of fear where I was at, you can't even see love, even though it's right in front of your face. You know, you can't see it. It's right there in front of your face, and you can't see it. You know, when we're living in this place of fear and all this stuff piling up, you know, you got love all around you. You can't see it. But so thanks for asking me about that. I actually really like to tell that story because of, you know, it's like this perfect metaphor for what it's like to be in fear and not be able to see something right in front of your face.
Hey, thank you so much for sharing, man. That was beautiful. You know, two things you brought up when you talked about Don. He used to have that quote that he always said, where true freedom is when there's no one left to impress. And, you know, it's funny, I was listening to this interview a long time ago with Oprah, and she said, she goes, you know, I've interviewed serial killers, CEOs, all these major people. You know, she's interviewed all kind of crazy people, from the, you know, the underbelly of society to some of the most successful spiritual people, all kind of stuff. He said, one of the things, they all ask the same questions when the cameras turn off. They all lean over to me and ask me, hey, was that okay? You know, did I do a good job there? They all want to get that little validation, you know, and I always love that. That always stuck with me. But there's talking about Emmett Fox, I mean, that's so much stuff to talk about in such a small time. So it's hard to really get super into it, but I really love this line in the big book. It made me think about this. And it talks about much has already been said about receiving strength, inspiration, and direction from him who has all knowledge and power. If we have carefully followed directions, we have begun to sense the flow of his spirit into us. To some extent, we have become God conscious. And that's the first time we're starting to live on this plane of inspiration. You know, that spring of God's inspiration inside of us is coming up. And it says, to some extent, we have become God consciousness. We have begun to develop this vital sixth sense, but we must go further, and that means more action. So a lot of what we were talking about made me think of that. And I just, I'll open it up. You guys did such a great job. Please raise your hand if you'd like to share. The first person I'll call on before we've got one hand, but I know that Kurt probably wants to share. Kurt, you around, man? Can you share for us?
Well, thanks, Kenny. I appreciate it, you guys. Yeah, I'll keep it short. I just, you know, what you brought up was a question that somebody brought up today. We were talking about it. We were talking about a question that you can ask yourself all the time. What is it that you know that you don't want to know? What is it you know that you don't want to know about yourself? And that was part of the thing. And the other was, the discussion was based on, it had to do with a talk Adeshanti had done on the epidemic of unworthiness in Western culture. That we have a real epidemic of unworthiness. And it had to do with some stuff we were talking about fear being usually not fear, it's just anxiety, but we call it fear. And separating the fear from the fear-based stories we create about the anxiety. And like really, really getting to a point where I could do that. And I think that ties into the emotional sobriety, because the emotional sobriety or unsobriety, I should say, was every time I experienced an emotion, there was a reaction. There was no response. It was it drove me. Outburst of anger, things like that. And until there was some place to stand and rest that wasn't in my head, that wasn't intellectual, that was not accessible to me. It was completely inaccessible. And I've said this before in this. I said, I tried to believe in that for a long time because I heard you guys talk about it. But I couldn't believe in it because I didn't have any direct experience with it. And, you know, it's just funny because now I'm looking at it. It seems like I'm looking at the problem from the solution. I'm not looking at the problem from the problem anymore, which made a huge difference. And I think that's all I got. I really, really appreciate you guys coming and sharing. And thanks, Sam.
Thank you. We have one participant, but it just says iPhone on there with their hand raised. So I don't know anybody there. The iPhone. There we go.
I'm Randy. I'm an alcoholic. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, Randy.
Hey, how y'all doing? I really appreciated that first the gentleman that spoke about the cirrhosis. I'm going through it right now. I want to share without break. I'm going to try to share without breaking down. I'm going to keep it really brief. But I've been having hepatitis B and C probably, I'm pretty sure 24 years. The C is not registering my viral load, but the B is. And I just recently got out the hospital and I got a gastroenterology appointment on October 6th. And I'm probably going to be going. I appreciate being on here. My sponsor suggested it for me. And then right away, I started hearing something I needed to hear. I just didn't plan it. Something I didn't plan for. I'm in a lot of pain. Feels like my bottom right rib is fractured or something like that. And, but I still have to keep it moving and keep doing the responsibilities that I have, the things that I agree to do with my sponsor. Some other things that I do, at the halfway house that I'm at. I manage now, but I'm still keeping everything going, but inside I'm just scared. But I'm not I just did.
I lost him. Did you guys lose him? There we go.
It's gonna be anyway. I don't want to keep going. I think you guys really understand where I'm at, so I don't have to keep on droning on with it. But I just appreciate you listening, And I appreciate the opportunity to share because I hadn't been to a meeting recently because of this. It's just uncomfortable for me to just. I haven't really been out much since this happened. So anyway, thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you for sharing. So looking for more participants with their hands raised. Nick?
Hi, everybody. Nick, alcoholic. Can you guys hear me? I just want to say a lot of that really resonated with me. You know, 4 years ago, somebody told me about, you know, aligning the heart and the mind, and I couldn't understand that. But when Jim mentioned something about that, I wish I could remember what you guys say. I got a horrible memory, but it really hit me. A lot of what you guys said really hit me. I'm very early recovery. I'm coming up on 8 months here, so I'm trying to soak in everything I can. And I just wanted to say I greatly appreciate it. I'm just loving what I'm hearing, and this whole M Fox thing really excites me. You know, I don't know. I'm an emotional wreck. And I haven't been on this like I should have been. I was 5 months ago here and there. I've been bouncing in and out, but I told myself recently I need to start coming to this Zoom meeting. You know, because every time I do, so much great things are said, and it sticks with me. And it's been a lot of a big part of my recovery. And I see where all this emotional recovery does tie into AA as well. And I'm just really grateful and thankful for all you guys. That's really what I wanted to say. Thank you.
So, Kenny, do you have it? There's people typically are, oh, there we go. Liz, what's going on, Liz?
Hey, I'm Liz. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you guys. I love this meeting. I love Thursdays because I know this is going to happen. And I think it's awesome to hear so much about Emmett Fox tonight. I just listened to a friend of mine who sent me a podcast about Emmett Fox, and you know, when you were talking about that thing in your heart that God's not a trickster, I really appreciated that. I think, you know, when I got sober and had an experience with God, that is such an overwhelming, exciting thing. And, you know, doing the steps and realizing that really I'm loved right now, and that, you know, there's a lot of opportunity in life when you're not drowned by fear, and wanting to share that with people, you know, because really it's nothing changes and then everything's different. And, you know, I don't know exactly how to communicate that. I know when I was younger, I spent a few years traveling, and when I came home, I was very excited to share my experience about, you know, I lived in South Africa for a couple of years, and I wanted to tell my friends and family on, show them pictures, and a lot of cool stuff happened. And their response was pretty much like, we don't really want to hear you bragging. And I think I probably some more self-centered fear, you know, when I got sober and I had my, you know, experience with God, and I want to share that love and that stuff, you know. After a while, I think people got kind of tired of it. They're like, okay, well, we don't want to hear you talking about that anymore. And it's taken me a couple of years to start learning that I'm, you know, my job is to be myself with all my might, and I can do that when I'm not relying on myself, because that's where my fear comes from. When I'm relying on myself, I'm scared, and it makes sense to me now. If I'm relying on God, I don't have to be afraid, and I'm not doing what I do for a reaction. I'm doing what I do because I'm in love with God, and I believe in that power, and I believe in that love, and I don't have to worry about how it's going, how people are going to respond to that, because I've learned to just keep going no matter what. And, you know, just being like Dawn was talking about last week, like emotionally immature, it took me a while of, you know, trying to spread that love and be that person and connect with people in that way. And, you know, if I don't get the reaction that I'm hoping for, I kind of retract and turtle head and I'm scared. And, you know, so I try to hide that again. And I just feel like, oh, people don't really want to know that. And people aren't really responding, you know, receptive to that. So I can't be that person. The world is going to reject that person. And then relapsing and coming back to the program and learning, you know, a couple of times more that I really have to be less selfish and more outgoing and more willing to serve. And like God's got me by the balls, because if I'm not in service and I'm not taking them into this book, my head just gets so full of these ideas and concepts. But if I'm doing it, if, you know, for everything that I say, there's an action to follow it up and I keep that pace, there's a flow about it. And there's a deeper level of understanding that I can't do intellectually. There's like some kind of magic perception that is serene about it. And I'm able to do things out of love without any expectation. And when I get rejected, that's okay. It's not about me. It's not about how you respond to me. I'm doing this because this is what I believe in. I believe in this power. I believe that this is love, and this is what I'm born to do. Like, I'm supposed to do this, and I'm learning to have faith in that, and not to have faith in everything that's going on around me. You know, I love that saying. We hear it all the time in the program, that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. You know, that's actually a quote by a guy in Teilhard de Chardin, who's a Jesuit priest who believed in evolution and was rejected by the world because of his teachings, and ended up having a heart attack because I think this guy just suffered so much from wanting to spread love and people telling him no, like, you're wrong and we reject you and that's not cool. So I believe that I am a spiritual being having a human experience, and being a human hurts. And I can't be this spiritual being if I'm trapped in a human perception. I have to have a spiritual perception of things, and I can't do that unless I'm connected to a power, and I can't hold on to that power unless I'm sharing it with other people every day. I can't exist on this planet unless I'm doing these steps. I'm doing this stuff on a daily basis, and I'm tirelessly trying to connect with people around this message. Otherwise, I'll be drunk or stoned or macrodosing shrooms in my kitchen or smoking pot every hour. Like, that's been my experience. If I'm not doing all of these things, I can't function. And it's been a long, hard lesson to accept that. And the funny thing is, it's my absolute joy when I'm doing those things. And I don't understand why it's taken me 35 years to get to a point where I can say, this is the only thing that I really want to do. And this is the thing that makes me happy, happier than I've ever been. And I've spent my whole life resisting it. It's kind of funny. But not funny, you know, when I'm in it. It's funny looking back in it when I'm in a good spiritual space. But this is totally like Meister Eckhart says, the joy that death does not have the power to destroy. And I can't rely on myself to stay in that mind frame at all. I have to be prayerful and work at it every day. I'm just kind of just an idiot without this. Thank you.
I got a nudge, and I was already thinking this, and then I got a nudge, and then I felt like, I just feel bad. I call on this person all the time, but then I just feel like maybe I'm inspired to do it. So, Mary Thayer, would you like to comment briefly?
Hi there. Yeah, I raised my hand because thank you guys. I really appreciated your share. my base of my life was Emmett Fox. Before I even got to AA, I had one of those God incidences that happened where I was introduced to talk to this man that ran a church down in, it was called the Invisible Ministry in Lake San Marcos, California, and it was based on Emmett Fox. And so I got little pamphlets, all those little pamphlets that you mentioned. I got all of those being sent to me while I was drinking. And but the Emmett Fox book that I really loved, and I, still love, still use, is Around the Year with Emmett Fox. It was the base for me. And I agree with you, there were little things I could do during the day that sustained me. Of course, I was kind of a drunken saint when I came in. It was God blessing everything and all the rest of it. And I remember this guy over at Radford said to me, God wants our head in the clouds with him, but our feet firmly planted on this plane. That's where our fellow travelers are. And I was grateful. I was really grateful he told me that, because I was kind of flying around like a bird with no legs. And I'd crash every once in a while because the spiritual malady, I didn't understand. I had to get sober, and I had to be guided a lot before I could really understand what was being said by Emmett Fox. But that did not take away from the fact that I didn't have demonstration after demonstration because I did what was being said. I truly even think that I remember screaming just before I came into the program, God, what is the matter with me? Because AA wasn't a popular thing at that time. And so, and right after that, I was 12-stepped into the halls. When you started talking about the heart's desire, I got laughing because my aunt would always take us to dinner and say, order your heart's desire. And Tom and Juana didn't believe me until they came to Maine and they got to order their heart's desire. And I know that Juana uses it when she gets to her third step, when she wants to God of her understanding. It's her heart's desire, her God is what she uses it on that. And lastly, I want to say that for the fear that I heard, I absolutely agree. I love the 91st Psalm. And I remember even drunk and in my early sobriety, I used the 91st Psalm, but it needed to be broken down the way Emmett Fox broke it down for me to understand what it meant. I wasn't raised in any church and I didn't have Bible reading or anything, but somehow that was a blessing to me. And that's enough. Thanks.
Thanks. So, hey, Kenny and Jim, before we wrap up, we're about done, but I just wanted to say, is there anything that you guys might want to, that you might have thought of while other people were sharing, or anything you feel like you left out, or anything you wanted to add?
Yeah. Well, I will say that the one thing in staying in this work that I'm aware of are these thoughts coming through from inside with kind of this, Lord is my shepherd, if the shepherd is there in this conscious place that I have tapped into, if that's where my thoughts are driven from. And that's a beautiful place, because then I will know that truth and that answer, and we can all relate. We can make a phone call and ask 8 people their opinion and hope we get the best answer, but we always have the truth. And the more work I do towards this, the more knowing I am in that truth. So
Thank you. Well, and to the gentleman that shared with the liver thing tonight, I think there was a lot of people who were holding you in their hearts and their mind's eye while you were sharing that. And a lot of people really, I could tell, had a deep focus on you there. So we're sending you some love. All right. So the way we close this up is we just we mute ourselves and we quietly go to our inner room, say the Lord's Prayer, and I'll meet you back for all who care to join. Thanks. Amen. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Kenny and Jim. That was a blast.
Thanks, Kenny and Jim.
Yeah, we had a good time. It's great to see everybody on this call. What a beautiful group. My God, how beautiful you are. Yeah, very nice.
Thanks,
Do you
Sam.
see hey, thank you, guys. You guys see Tom and Juana?
I